A reading from Ephesians chapter 2, verses 1 through 10. You were dead through the trespasses and sin in which you once lived, following the course of this world, following the ruler of the power of the air, the spirit that is now at work among those who are disobedient. All of us once lived among them in the passions of our flesh, following the desires of flesh and senses, and were by nature children of wrath, like everyone else. But God, who is rich in mercy, out of the great love with which he loved us, even when we were dead through our trespasses, made us alive together with Christ. By grace you have been saved, and raised us up with him, and seated us with him in the heavenly places in Christ Jesus, so that in the age to come he might show the immeasurable riches of his grace in kindness toward us in Christ Jesus. For by grace you have been saved through faith. And this is not your own doing, it is the gift of God, not the result of works, so that no one may boast. For we are what he has made us, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand to be our way of life. I've done some form of prison ministry on and off since my late teens. In doing so, I learned that many inmates can put high-end restaurants to shame with their creativity and results achieved with such limited ingredients and tools. The desserts that can be achieved by strategically combining the contents of an average vending machine and the main courses that they produce with only ramen packets, a hot plate, a limited set of household staples, and no fresh ingredients will boggle your mind. Necessity long ago got declared the mother of invention, and no human can tolerate the same institutional food year in and year out. This, plus a lot of time on their hands, has produced some true culinary marvels. I learned that even in prison, there are fashion-based status symbols. Sure, everyone has to wear the same basic outfit, and everyone has the same limited access to a shockingly few items in the commissary. However, at least in Texas, inmates can buy footwear from the commissary, a small number of athletic shoes and work boots. Thus, the type, newness, and cleanliness of one's shoes takes on the prison equivalent of sneaker culture. I learned that we've found ways to nickel and dime inmates for even basic creature comforts. Want to send a letter? You need to buy stamps. Want to call somebody instead? Even a local call will cost you. Want to send an email? A normally zero-cost thing in the free world? That will cost you as well. Want to video chat with your family? That costs too. It creates a real catch-22 because connection to a support network, both inside and outside the prison walls, connects directly to folks having a more positive outcome both in prison and after release. I also learned about the reality and power of God's redemption. I met a man who openly admitted to murdering his family. He found God within the walls of a prison. The encounter left him utterly changed. Began to minister to his fellow inmates, write Bible studies, and earn a degree in theology. The redemption of his soul radiated through the utter newness of his life. I walked into a worship service in the community room of a prison in Virginia that just felt different. They sang songs of grace, as I had thousands of times, but that grace felt palpable in the air. Perhaps in a space where you can no longer hide from yourself or others the reality of your sin, it frees you to celebrate the tremendous gift that God has given you. I listened to middle-aged suburban dads preach to teenagers locked up in a juvenile prison. Instead of striking a tone of parental moral superiority, these men talked openly of their own sin, failing, and susceptibility. I had never heard church members talk so openly about their own need for redemption. Most adults at church that I had known covered up their sins with a thick veneer of their Sunday best. I knew that I needed God's grace, and could finally understand the universality of that need. Ephesians 2 points out the absolute need for God's grace and its fundamental availability. The larger arch of the letter seeks to unite Jews and Gentiles with their need for grace, opportunity to receive said grace, and how their lives can be transformed by the power of God's grace. Our snippet begins that argument with a beautiful and punchy summation of the good news. As we all start, we are inescapably children of wrath. Our own sinfulness and the power of evil forces of the world combine to set a trap that we lack the capacity to escape. Christ changes that, as it says in verses 4 through 7. But God, who is rich in mercy, out of the great love with which he loved us, even when we were dead through our trespasses, made us alive together with Christ. By grace you have been saved, and raised us up with him, and seated us with him in the heavenly places in Christ Jesus, so that in the age to come he might show the immeasurable riches of his grace in kindness towards us in Christ Jesus. In Christ, we all have the opportunity to receive God's grace, experience redemption, and live a new life. We'd love to add theological complications and nuances, but Ephesians effectively sweeps those away. We need grace. In Christ, we get given that grace. Gracious living can look totally different from what came before it. Of all the things that I missed in my theoretically Christian upbringing, this stands out as the most egregious omission. It's not that no one talked about grace or salvation or redemption. Shoot, occasionally we would end up at a youth retreat where someone would spend the weekend spewing hellfire and brimstone at us. I came out of my experiences in the church with an understanding of my own sinfulness, and I certainly knew a lot of nice, moral-acting people. However, everyone appeared to approach church life as if that's how everyone had always been. We might talk about the wonder of God's grace, but no one acted like they needed it. It took venturing into one of the few places where everyone there has to almost wear their sin physically for me to face the reality of redemption. It's not that inmates are uniquely sinful. They perhaps did things that our legal system frowns upon, but we all do things that God frowns upon. Instead, the realities of prison life serve as their own kind of scarlet letter announcing your sinfulness to all that you encounter, including yourself. Although this way of life sounds painful, it creates an opportunity for a more honest religious community. No one gets to put on a veneer of sinlessness, so the power of God's redeeming grace has an opportunity to shine forth. You don't have to go to a prison to have this kind of faith community. It merely takes honesty about our need for redemption. In telling that more honest story, we make God's redeeming grace more real for the people around us. In receiving these real human stories, we can glimpse the power of God's grace for ourselves. To leave all that out and to continue to paint on the veneer robs us all of the chance to see the reality and power of God's redeeming grace.